Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for sharing your time with me today as we begin our first of 6 free educational webinars that will be available this year from the IPAF North American Regional Council. Today's presentation is the MEWP Supervisor Driving Safe Operations, a Key to Operational Excellence. My name is Tony Grout. I'm IPAF's North America Regional Manager, and I am chairman of the ANSI, Canadian CSA, and ISO MEWP Safe Use Standards. At any point in time, if you want to get a hold of me in follow-up or in future for any questions, my email address is on the screen, tony.groat@ipaf.org. This session is being recorded for future replay, so if you like what you hear today, I want to share this with others within your organizations. Please let us know, and this will be available on YouTube download as well. If you move the screen up, your cursor down, you will be able to see that there's a chat box and a Q&A. Anybody who would like to ask a question from this presentation, please type those into the chat, into the Q&A box, and we'll address those as time allows at the end of the session. And if you have any questions or problems hearing or whatever it may be for the presentation, put those in the chat box, and Anna Solano, who is the administrator for these sessions, will be able to address those with you individually. So let's begin. While this session will reference the need for supervisor training, just to be clear, this is not a MEWP supervisor training course today. It's only a preview of the needs and requirements for training and the value of completing the course. So our aim for this particular session is, as you can read on the screen, best practices for supervising MEWP operators, navigating safety standards and ensuring compliance, and achieving operational excellence in temporary work at height. So to be clear from a definition of what a MEWP supervisor is, the ANSI A92 standards define a MEWP supervisor as a person assigned by the user employer to monitor MEWP operator performance and supervise their work. So it is ultimately the employer's responsibility to ensure that a safe workplace is in place. But as you can imagine, the employer has many people who assist in making sure that that happens, and the MEWP supervisor is one of those people. So I wanted to kind of begin with a little story just to put us in the right mindset. And there was a contractor who held an employee event, and a young boy approached his dad's supervisor and told him that when I get older and I get a job, I'm going to give you some money. And the supervisor was a bit surprised by that and asked, why do you want to give me money? And the young boy said to him that every day when my dad gets home from work, he says, "You're the poorest supervisor he's ever met." So hopefully today we'll add some value for anybody who is a supervisor to help that little boy out. An author and productivity consultant, David Allen, who promotes personal productivity in his programs, Get Things Done, offers a great quote that every supervisor should consider. You can't manage time. You actually only manage what you do during time. So the management issue is not so much about time. It's more about how do you manage your focus? How do you manage your actions and your activities in terms of what you do? So today we're going to focus a little bit on focusing on what actions, what actions are we referring to, and activities, which activities. So let's examine how a MEWP supervisor can answer some of those questions. So I'm going to offer you a couple of bumper stickers like you see on the screen today, just to really think about things a little bit differently. So, feeling safe and being safe are not the same things. So, let's look at a few pictures that would demonstrate this. So, again, look at the header: focus, plan, understand what your risks are. So, we too often see unsafe actions that didn't result in an accident. Some companies survive years in unsafe work environments without an accident occurring. So, because they didn't have an accident, does that mean that they have a safe workplace? Look at these pictures. What is the risk management strategy for these companies? Nothing's happened. They didn't have an accident. So they don't need to do anything. What are they measuring? If it's only accidents, they can't prevent these unsafe conditions from reoccurring, as they're not measuring anything to take action upon. As you'll hear as we go forward, looking at risk and potential hazards, we can only act on what we report. The identification of a monitoring and supervising of improper activities, near misses, can point us towards actions that prevent them from becoming an accident. That's why MEWP users must build on the foundation of having a safe workplace, a safe use plan, and having effective MEWP supervisors in place. So in order to achieve safe operations, we must start with the questions: how do we measure what a MEWP safe operation is? So let me start with this saying: safety is not the absence of accidents. Safety is the presence of defenses to prevent accidents and reduce the consequences of accidents if they cannot be prevented. It's the ability to manage risk and avoid and mitigate incidents that can cause or damage. So, again, here's another bumper sticker for you. Safe people do what they need to do, whether they feel like it or not. So, take the time to do things the right way the first time. Think about those times that you have been out there or you've seen people who have to move a boom lift and you don't have your full protection with you. And so you're in a rush and you get in and you move the boom lift without wearing the required full protection equipment. That is leading by example the wrong way. And when you allow those things to happen, you are condoning those actions. So again, safe people do what they need to do, whether they feel like it or not. You must do the right thing all the time. And that's a real critical element that needs to be shown by supervisors in the field. So consider how companies' commitment to workplace safety is any different than an individual's commitment for a New Year's resolution. So a classic paper in '89 estimated that 77% of people kept their resolutions for 1 week, 55% for a month, and 40% made it to half a year. So really, what is your commitment to a safe workplace? And if you're a supervisor, how do you make that commitment be permanent on the job sites that you're with? So the key message today that is, while MEWP operators must be trained prior to MEWP operations, the MEWP supervisor has a greater set of responsibilities that include safety of the operators and all the other people who are on the job site around those operations. So let's look at some of the value added propositions that this training can bring about. One is we start with risk management, which is a critical element for every company. And specifically, they manage the task to prevent accidents. They set clear expectations for the operators. They are the coach and evaluator for operators. I always look at it, we take an operator and we put them through a 1 day training course and think about it in terms of whether an individual is an apprentice or a journeyman. They need to be coached, they need to be developed for them to become qualified at their task. They have the opportunity of giving feedback to help operators know what to do so that they will succeed. They serve as subject matter experts. They're the ones who really are in charge of all the aspects of safe operations. They improve problem solving and decision making skills, and they increase the quality and productivity of operators. So there's a lot of value in the development of an appropriate MEWP supervisor, in addition to having good qualified operators. So what is it worth it? What are the rules and regulations that go to these mobile elevated work platforms as we know them today, are MEWPs, aerial work platforms in the past? We have the OSHA regulations, which are 1910 and 1926, based on industry or construction. We have the ANSI A92 standards, specifically A92.22 or 24 if you're in Canada. It's the B354.7 and 8 safe use and training standards. You also have job specific requirements that are out there that go beyond what specific that may be required in both regulations and standards. And then we end up having the operations manual and industry best practices that are also available. Really, a supervisor needs to be somewhat knowledgeable on all of these elements and make sure that they can take those and implement those onto the job sites that they're working on. So to make a really clear statement, completing an OSHA 10 or 30-hour course will not provide you as a supervisor with the specialized knowledge that's required for MEWP safe operations. When you're looking at the OSHA regulations for aerial work platforms, they were written in 1970, and they today recognize a scissor lift as a rolling scaffold tower. But there's a clear obligation by all federal regulators in all countries that an employer must provide a workplace that is free from hazards. So you need to make sure that you end up having somebody who's managing on your jobs. And when you're looking at what's known as a 581, which is the general duty clause, and you have an accident on your job site, think about what their required checks are. A hazard exists in the workplace. The employer or industry recognizes the hazard. A hazard is likely to cause death or serious injury, and feasible means exist to eliminate or reduce those hazards. I will guarantee you that anytime there is a serious or fatal accident, every one of those boxes is going to be checked off. So again, there's a hazard. Most times these things are going to be part of a recognized hazard in the marketplace. It caused an injury, and believe me, there are feasible ways for you to eliminate or reduce that hazard, and we're going to do that through education. While OSHA looks at all industries and all types of accidents that occur, and you can look at the data that comes from there, their fatal four are electrocutions, falls, caught between and struck by. So those are the fatal four. And if you only look at those from the OSHA perspective, you miss out a lot of the details. And IPAF keeps data specific to mobile elevated work platforms. You can go to our website and download this data to look at more specific information that's involved with it, because you need to be aware of what the potential hazards are to manage those effectively. So I would also encourage all of you who are involved with the industry to look at that website, which is a reporting site that we gather this information that we utilize for lots of different means, and encourage you to actually go in there and add to that any type of incidents that you see, which could be a near miss to a minor incident that won't show up on a OSHA data report, but will be important for us to look at as we're moving forward, trying to ensure that we improve safety in our industry. Our industry as a whole focuses in our ANSI and CSA industry standards for the design, safe use, and training for these products. Every manufacturer manufactures to these standards, and all of our industry then follows with the safe use and training for these. It really is important. And just so that you're aware of it, the SAIA, which is the Scaffold and Access Industry Association, are the secretariat for the A92 standards, and they make available what's known as a manual of responsibilities, which is an exact copy of the safe use and training standard, all the responsibilities that are in there. And you could go to their website and buy a copy of it for $7.95 for plus shipping. So this is something that if you are a supervisor, you need to be aware of the rules and regulations that apply to it. And here's the document that our industry uses and follows. And here's an inexpensive way for you to get a copy of that. Within that, we define this new entity, because before we end up having, if you're looking at OSHA regulations, it's the employer, employee, and the lion's share of all of the responsibilities fall on the employer. Within our standards, we end up saying that there's a manufacturer of the equipment, there's a dealer, could be rental companies who provide you with equipment. There's owners of the equipment that can be the rental companies, or it could be a contractor or anybody who purchased one of those, and they have the responsibility for maintaining it. And for the most part, when I got involved with this industry years ago, and we looked at industry statistics from insurance companies, they would put almost 90% of all accidents on the shoulders of the operator. And as I've been doing this for many years, I would go over and say, that is only true from the perspective that they're the ones who have their hands on the controls of the machine. But when you're looking at it, there's a lot of things that they don't have the responsibility for. They're not doing risk assessments. They're not doing the selection of the equipment. And there's lots of other elements that we're going to go through a little bit as we go through these slides to show you that it really is critical for an employer to have great supervisors in place to ensure that all of the elements that are necessary are put in place to secure a safe workplace, safe and productive workplace. So when you're looking at this new entity, the MEWP supervisor, they are required to monitor the performance of the work of the operator to ensure compliance with the provisions of the safe use standard. They monitor, supervise, and evaluate the operators on a regular basis to ensure their proficiency through a visual observation at a minimum, which shall be documented. Excuse me. And operators are required to notify their supervisors and avoid risk until directed otherwise by their supervisor. So while we train an operator, if they have an issue, who do they go to? It is the supervisor. And as a byproduct, that supervisor needs to be educated on all of these elements. And when it comes to retraining, which is different than renewal, retraining requires instructions based on their observations and evaluations to maintain a previously trained person's status as a qualified operator. So there's a lot of responsibilities that are in place, and you need to have someone who's qualified to perform those tasks. It's important to note that the user employer has responsibilities that may be assumed by the MEWP supervisor. Creating a MEWP safe use plan is a requirement for a user employer. And ensuring a MEWP operator is trained, familiarized, and assessed by a qualified person for the task are such examples. So within that, a MEWP supervisor's training that's required in our ANSI standards requires the proper selection of the MEWP for the work to be performed, understanding of the rules, regulations, and standards that apply to MEWPs, the potential hazards associated with MEWPs, and the means to protect against the identified hazards, and the knowledge that manufacturer's operator's manual are an integral part of the MEWP and need to be stored with that piece of equipment to comply with other aspects of safe operation. So when I look at the overall responsibilities within our standards, we require a MEWP-specific safe use plan. And this pictorial goes through a lot of those elements. So industry standards, including the ISO 18893 and ANSI A92, have what's called a system of work or safe use plan that is required to be developed. And here you can see risk assessments, equipment selection, site access, preparation, and maintenance, ensuring that you have properly trained personnel, that the equipment is maintained and inspected and repaired, that the operator, in addition to being trained, is familiarized, that you also have to make sure that you are maintaining the safety of others. You need to protect that the equipment is not accessible for unauthorized users. You need to make sure, excuse me, we have to get back here, that if there are any site-specific requirements. So an example is the standards don't require that personal fall protection is worn on vertical lifts, scissor lifts. On certain sites, it is going to be a requirement. So you need to make sure that on that site, you are going to apply that specific requirement on that site. And that we have trained supervisors to evaluate operators for their proficiency, and that we have documentation for all this. Because believe me, if you ever have an incident and you get into a court case, if it's not in writing, it didn't occur. So documentation is a critical element. And we need to be able to manage these tasks. And a MEWP supervisor has a lot of accountability within many, or if not all, of these elements. So when we talk about a MEWP safe use program, IPAF has developed a guide for you to follow. You can go to our website and download this document. And this is a tool that, again, everyone should be familiar with, because all of these are responsibilities for every employer on every job site. So even when you're doing training, you have the responsibilities to make sure that a risk assessment done, it's a safe workplace to operate that equipment. So all of these are apply anytime that the machine is operated for any purpose. So this is a tool that you have with lots of forms that go out there. So let's look at part of the element that extends to that MEWP supervisor. One thing that we can all agree upon is that to identify and mitigate the risk from hazard is a requirement for all employers on all job sites. OSHA requires that training include the recognition of hazards associated with the work and understanding procedures to control or minimize those hazards. So universally, this is in place. And there are within our standards a very clear set of stages that are required for a MEWP risk assessment that a person performing the risk assessment must understand. The identification of the task to be undertaken, selection of an appropriate MEWP, the identification of risk associated with the task, identification of control measures, and then when the control measures are put in place, identification of safe work procedures to ensure that those control measures are implemented. Then we have rescue from height and communicating those results. So again, we implement, we train, we evaluate, we retrain. So all of these elements are a responsibility of a MEWP supervisor on behalf of the employer. So one of the things that really is critical is the identification of tasks to be undertaken. And as we're looking at mobile elevated work platforms, and we think about, well, what's the task? Uh, in many cases, the primary task is different than operation of a mobile elevated work platform. So if you were a painter or a plumber or an electrician looking to gain temporary access to height, your primary job is painting and doing your electrical work and plumbing or whatever the case may be. But being an operator of the equipment is secondary. So thinking about what the task is, look at all the tasks that are involved with when you make the selection of a mobile elevated work platform for your operation. The delivery and pickup from the job site. So what are the conditions where that is? Are you dropping it off on the side of a road? Are you dropping it off on a work site where all different types of equipment are moving around and equipment being loaded and unloaded? Think about traveling on the job site, the same thing. Lots of other trades are in place, lots of other things that are taking place. How are we going to be doing these things? What are those tasks? Setting up the equipment in location and moving it from location to location and all those various setups that are going to be required. The safe operation equipment on an ongoing basis. We have requirements for the inspection and maintenance of that equipment. Then we have the obligation and responsibilities for monitoring, supervising, and evaluation of the people who are performing these tasks and the safety of others who are around the site. And you can have other trades on a site, or you can actually be on a site where you end up having the general public in the vicinity. You have fueling and charging, you have daily parking and storage of the equipment, and other tasks that are involved. So when we talk about identifying the task and a risk assessment, that detail really gets much further than just saying, I'm painting and I'm operating a lift. Then we get through with performing this task and what's the appropriate equipment for this. Uh, we have to make sure that we're looking at all of the attributes that are required for this proper selection of the equipment. And within that scope, there's the basic things that we will all think about, which is what's the height that I need to reach and how many people do I need to have in the work platform. We get very basic with it, but there's lots of other elements, which is what are the job site conditions? Do I need a rough terrain capable driving machine? Am I indoor? Do I need to ensure that I have a battery operated versus an internal combustion machine in operation? So there are lots of variables and attributes that are there, and there are lots of tools that are out there to assist you. And that is a supervisor in the proper selection of the equipment. You can go to IPAF's website, and we provide optional tools for this to occur. And as I said, this is one of the many stages that are required within the MEWP, risk assessment. So maybe you recall this picture that I had when I first showed this in one of the earlier slides. And here's a lift that was selected to access this area for doing painting. And here you can see a worker who has exited the work platform because he needed to paint the lower area. And if you can imagine him standing in that uh, work platform, trying to reach through that, painting those lower areas, when it comes to what is going to be easier for the worker to perform, you can see here, regardless of all the training that takes place and all of the observations that you want to make, the exit has no fall protection on them when they're working on this. So when we're talking about making the proper selection, understand that today there are options that are out there. So here's an example of one manufacturer having a device that goes on the outside of the work platform that allows someone to be connected to the work platform when they're exiting at height following the recommendations of procedures from that manufacturer. So here you can see that if the proper selection of the equipment was done, and that's an appropriate machine, but they did not select the appropriate auxiliary work equipment associated with it to ensure the safety of that worker. So here you can see if they applied and got that exterior anchorage system, that worker would be connected at all times and be safe. So selection of the equipment and their associated accessories is equally critical. And knowing what is available in the marketplace is truly another piece of information that a MEWP supervisor needs to have. So here you can see if the correct MEWP is not selected, to safely perform all the tasks that are on that job site, the workers will improvise and create new hazards. Users, supervisors must understand the importance of selecting and monitoring the worksite operations to make sure that the safe work equipment is in place for performing all the tasks. So here you can see multiple situations where was the proper risk assessment done to ensure that the appropriate selection of equipment was chosen to perform these tasks. And here you can see that the operators had decided that, okay, I need to go do this task, and their job was to what? Get the task done, not doing the task safely, and understanding that part of their task is to be a safe MEWP operator. When we also look at the stages of a risk assessment, one of the things I look at is nonconformity. So I was struck by this incident that occurred several years ago. And within the stages of a risk assessment, things that a MEWP supervisor needs to be aware of is we identify control measures. It's once the hazard and risk involved in the test have been identified, put procedures in place to require them to be identified and implemented. So in this picture, we can see that there's overhead power lines, and they had to have identified that as a hazard because what you can see on all of those lines is they were booted with an insulator on that. So again, the next step is identify safe work procedures. So one of them was booting those lines. And as you look at this, what occurred was that the lift ended up coming in contact with the wire and actually knocked the insulating boot off of it, and we ended up having a catastrophic event that occurred. It's really critical to understand that you need to have the safe work procedures that prevent such things from happening. Just putting the insulators on the line doesn't prevent contact with that wire. So what are the other safe work procedures that needed to be put in place, which could be they may not have selected the right piece of equipment initially for this job. B is they could have gone and had an individual on the ground be an observer to ensure that they maintain their distance from those connections. So having safe work procedures, which is maintaining a safe distance from the overhead power lines, has to have all of the safe work procedures in place. And this is a task that also requires the observation of someone to ensure that they are implementing those safe work procedures. So the role of a MEWP supervisor is critical. That often it's thought that getting personnel through operator training courses all that's necessary to make them qualified. In truth, by definition, training enables one to become qualified. Here are some of the requirements that you must include in your plan. Operator qualifications. The user shall ensure that the operator is both mentally and physically capable to perform the task. So when we're looking at physical and mental capabilities, What does that mean? That we have to have a PhD on site, to do this stuff? Really, it's if you see someone who's frightened to be in the air, and I've watched people, and this is, I'm going to show you, I'm going to go back to this one here and say that they got trained just because they're trained on a 40-foot boom lift. Here you see a picture down below of a machine that goes 185 foot and is drivable in the air. Just because they're a trained operator doesn't mean they're trained. So there's lots of elements that require supervision and observation to ensure and assess that the operators are properly qualified to perform the task. We have a requirement that just because an operator is trained, there are situations that occur that say that we need to continually monitor, supervise, and evaluate them on a regular basis to ensure that they maintain their proficiency. There are examples. I'm going the wrong way. Of requirements for situations where retraining would be required. So the expiration of a valid training period for an operator. Most times it's 3 years, a maximum of 5 years. So in that particular case, they need to have their training renewed. When we're looking at doing this evaluation, we're going to go over just saying there are other elements: deterioration of performance, the operator's extended period of time that they haven't operated a lift. So we were trained for 3 years. We got trained because we had a job, and then a year goes by before they've used the lift again. Just saying that they were trained a year ago, but they haven't used it in that period of time could be a place where retraining is necessary. The operator's introduction to new or significantly new technology. All types of equipment are being introduced into the marketplace. All different types of operational characteristics change on equipment. So these are all things that are out there. And last but not least is the operator has been involved with an accident or near miss. So the evaluation will be accomplished through a visual observation at a minimum, but we need to make sure that we are paying attention to all of these attributes and practices for an operator to ensure their proficiency. And one of my favorite Yogi Berra's sayings is, you can observe a lot by just watching. So a very simple statement that's out there, which is a supervisor doesn't need to be on the job 24/7. They need to be out there and be doing observations, watching what's going on to ensure that the operator is performing appropriately for all of the tasks that we are proving them to perform. So again, here's another one of my bumper stickers for you. You can't change someone who does not see an issue with their actions. So think about the operators. You can't change someone who does not see an issue with their actions. But as a supervisor, you can only change how you react to them. So again, we're talking about the responsibility to monitor, supervise, and evaluate them on a regular basis. You can only change how you react to them. The one thing that I would put out there, looking at OSHA citations and accident investigations, the one thing that you need to make sure that you do is, how do you react to them? A lot of those pictures that we saw early on, if they're looking at those and walking by them and not doing anything with them, they're condoning them. You're saying they're okay. They're appropriate operations. They got the job done, check. Not that they get the job done safely. So the only thing that you can change is how you react to them. And if you expect that the operators perform safely at all times, then you need to make sure that you use the word discipline. And again, sometimes, and having lived this life, I would tell you that there are times when my best performer in terms of productivity was also one of my high maintenance employees. So as a supervisor, you need to make sure that you put in place the discipline for everyone equally. So if something is not being performed the way that it should be performed, that needs to be taken care of. So while you may not be able to change their actions because they don't see the issues, and I need to get the job done, you need to make sure that you're putting in place the actions to ensure that they are going to be done properly. So where do I get MEWP supervisor training? This has been a requirement since around 2018 when the standards were published. And these are available through multiple manufacturers. IPAF has a program that's out there. Generally, these programs are available as a e-learning program, meaning that it's an online program that the individual can take at their own pace and convenience. It's available 24/7 wherever you have access to the internet. Uh, when you complete it, there's testing on it. You can download a certificate immediately after the completion of it. We have IPAF has training centers and members who do this. Examples are United Rental, Sunbelt Rental, the Construction Safety Council. Many of our training centers all offer these programs. You can go to their websites. You can just go in there and acquire access to one of these courses. They're just so readily available, and we need more take up on these training programs that are a requirement that will ensure the safety of this equipment out in the workplace. So again, there's an awful lot that you can see in that safe use program of items that are out there that are MEWP specific. You're not going to be able to pick up the details that are requirements for the safe operation of this equipment by taking an OSHA 10 or 30 course. There's a lot more detail that's required there. And I will add to this that just like this presentation here, even when you take these courses, you need to do continuous development and look at other information that's out there. Just as a listing of information that's available, that's out there, IPAF, whose mission is to promote and affect the effective use, safe use of powered access equipment. Here are some of the things that are out there that we and other associations and companies who supply this equipment can provide you with. We have our accident data report. There's a link to that where you can go and look at that information. We have the IPAF webinar on global safety reporting. So taking that data and analyzing it. We have the MEWP specific safe use plan available to be downloaded and used to create your own MEWP specific safe use plan. Guidance on the assessment of ground condition is one of many safe use guidance documents that we have available. The IPAF MEWP selection checklist that you saw on the presentation is available out there. And we have ANSI Access, which is our toolbox talks and posters that are associated with many of the potential hazards and safe use programs that are out in the marketplace. So there's lots of tools that are out there that continually will enhance the knowledge of your MEWP supervisors that need to be taking on an ongoing basis beyond just the safe the MEWP supervisor training course. Lastly, I'll just mention, there's lots of opportunities for developing knowledge and networking with other people. Here's a list of multiple events that IPAF will be involved with. We'll be at the Construction Expo and Safety Conference in Chicago. I will actually be presenting two programs at that event. So there's an educational conference and there's an expo for looking at equipment that's available in the marketplace. We have AGC Contractor Solutions Expo, ASSP Safety Conference, VPPPA Safety and Symposium. There are the SAIA Annual Convention, the OSHA Safe and Sound Week, and you could go through the whole list. Go to IPAF's website and look for upcoming events for any of these elements. We will have other webinars as this as well. And with that, I'm concluding today's presentations, and I am now open for any questions that anyone may have. So if there are any questions, I see none at this point. If anyone has a question, you can type those in. Thank you, David. So again, we will have other educational webinars that will be coming forward. We'll be putting those out. Look at our website for information. I again encourage all of you to look at continually improving your professional development by attending these and other events in the industry. And as there are no other questions, this concludes today's presentation. And I thank you all for your time today.